Time magazine has called her one of the world's 100 most influential people. Malalai Joya is an Afghan politician and a human rights campaigner. Under the Taliban, she operated secret underground schools providing an education for the country's girls. She's an outspoken critic of Afghanistan's President Hamid Karzai and of the US-led occupation. But speaking out has come at a cost. There have been 6 attempts on her life. The most recent scare came just last month when gunmen attacked her office in Kabul. Malalai Joya is visiting Australia to address a public meeting in Sydney later this week. Welcome to Lateline.
Thank you. Thanks for the interview, Emma.
Tell us, you want troops out entirely from the country, but is the military ready to take responsibility?
As 10 years ago, US and NATO invaded our country under the fake banner of women's rights, human rights and democracy under the name of so-called war on terror. Unfortunately, they pushed us from the frying pan into the fire. They replaced terrorist Taliban with fundamentalist warlords who are brother and creed of the Taliban. And even nowadays they are talking about handing over the responsibility to the Afghan National Army and police. As I believe it is just like a trick that to use them as cannon fodders to decrease the number of their own soldier casualties. And this 10 years of occupation, the head of Afghan National Army and Police was and is still the powerful warlords. And even with the uniform of the police, those militias belongs to these warlords and did civil war in the past before of domination of the Taliban in different provinces of Afghanistan, kill people publicly. And it's not in their agenda that Afghan people stand on their own feet, because they occupied Afghanistan for their own regional, economic, political and military interests.
But you would have to say that Afghanistan today is a better place, especially for women, than it was 10 years ago?
Not only women, men and women of Afghanistan. In the Taliban time, they had one enemy, but now they have, in this 10 years of occupation, almost 11, 3 enemies. Warlords, Taliban, and occupation forces. And unfortunately, in 30 years of the war, during these decades of war, women was the most and first victims, and still many violences against them. Especially in faraway provinces, situation for women is like hell, but catastrophic situation of women was very good excuse for US and NATO to occupy our country. As now rape cases, domestic violences, acid attacks, burning the girls' schools, cutting the nose, fingers and ears of women, and many other kind of different kind of inhuman violences increasing against women day by day more.
But this seems extraordinary when we hear that back in 2001 the average life expectancy for a woman in Afghanistan was 44. Now, some 10-11 years later, it's 62. You yourself was running an underground school that can now flourish in the open. Aren't you evidence yourself of the advancement of women in Afghanistan, the fact that you made it into the parliament?
I think alone my life story is enough to know about the mockery of democracy and mockery of war on terror in Afghanistan. When you compare with the dark period of the Taliban, I was activist. It was risky on that time under burqa, but I was teaching underground. But today, despite wearing burqa and bodyguard not safe, as you mentioned about these assassination attempts and also many other problems and obstacles that not only me, many other democratic-minded men and women, these activists that they are facing, especially women, still in most of provinces, women are wearing this disgusting burqa just to be safe and alive. And also
women are wearing the burqa to hide, you mean?
To hide their identity, that do not be target as they are active. And this disgusting burqa is a symbol of oppression, but today gives safety and life to millions of women. And even in Kabul, by presence of tens of thousands of troops, millions of Afghan men and women, they do not feel security, and they suffer from injustice, corruption, joblessness, poverty, etc. And you mentioned about parliament. It is true in the Taliban time we didn't have parliament. But this 10 years of occupation we have, but one of the most disgusting mafia dirty parliament that we have. And election itself was corrupt, and our people use this famous saying, it's not important who is voting, it's important who is counting. And majority seats of the parliament belongs to the warlords, stragglers, even to the Taliban.
But you made it into parliament. I understand you were kicked out of the parliament in 2007. What were the circumstances?
The reason because I never said silence there, and I exposed the brutalities of these warlords who the 10 years they have had, and still they have mask of democracy, and now they are already negotiating with the terrorist Taliban as well. And I exposed their brutalities, and because I was the small voice of the voiceless people of Afghanistan inside of this disgusting parliament, telling the truth. And as I was a woman as well, of course, they couldn't tolerate me, as I never did compromise with them. That's why, like political conspiracy, they censored one of my interview and expelled me, which was quite a legal act. And despite national and international condemnation, they did not allow me to go back to this mafia parliament. And as I wanted to go back, the reason was to be there and to not allow them to make easier these kind of disgusting laws against women, especially misogynist laws, and all the laws that today in Afghanistan, the 10 years, we have this constitution, but unfortunately all these beautiful laws just on the papers. And if it was benefit for these bunch of killers, warlords who are in power, they will use it. Otherwise they will look like a waste paper.
You mentioned earlier that Afghanistan now has 3 enemies, where before it only had one, the Taliban. You said the Taliban, now you have the Taliban, the warlords, and the occupiers. You mean the US and its allies, Australia?
Of course.
Do you see Australia as an enemy?
Of course, because in this 10 years of occupation, Australian government, unfortunately, they did not act independently. They followed the wrong policy of the US, which we believe is war crime. And tens of thousands of innocent civilians have been killed, most of them women and children, during these bloody wars and criminal war. And even Australian government goes to such extent that support criminal warlords like Mutila Khan in Uruzgan province, that he is receiving $340,000 per month from Australia government, US government, and other Western governments. And they are the friends of the enemies of Afghan people, who are great obstacles for the true democratic-minded elements in Afghanistan. And that's why we believe that this 10 years, they just wasted the blood of their soldiers and also their taxpayer money.
Many young Australian soldiers have died in Afghanistan.
Yes, condolence is not enough to those families who lost their sons and daughters in our country. And unfortunately, their government sent them for this criminal war, for occupation. And they suffer, Australian family, US family, they should know that democracy never comes by military invasion, by urinating the corpses of Afghan, by doing massacres, by bombing our wedding parties, what they did in Nangarhar, in Nuristan. And recently in Kandahar province, these cruel American soldiers killed 16 innocent civilians, most of them women and children. And unfortunately, Australia government followed, and still they are following this war policy of the US and Afghanistan. And for our people, there is no difference between the Australian troops or Italian troops or 40 other countries who, under the name of NATO, dare and follow the criminal policy of the US and Afghanistan, as they are there for their own dirty agendas. They want to change Afghanistan to the military base and intelligence base in the Asia.
Well, I guess fundamentally they were hoping that democracy might have a chance to flourish, which you yourself say is your aim.
You know, democracy, elementary meaning of democracy is government of people, for people. But unfortunately, the 10 years of occupation, enemies of Afghan people imposed on them, especially these misogynist, terrorist elements. And day by day, they are making disgusting laws, especially against women.
What's the alternative?
Yeah, the alternative, of course, that first the troops should withdraw, because
what does that leave for Afghanistan? If you say there are warlords and Taliban, well, what else is there?
Yeah, they must let Afghans to decide their own future, or in other words, it's self-determination. And also, democratic-minded forces of Afghanistan are the only alternative that who are able to fight against fundamentalism and against terrorism, and people trust them. And democracy without justice is meaningless. And those bunch of killers who committed crimes and did massacres and killed innocent civilians in Afghanistan, this decades of the war, still they are in power with the mask of democracy. People of Afghanistan want them that they must be brought to the National International Criminal Court. And first of all, they must be powerless. And this 10 years, they shed the blood of innocent people of Afghanistan under the name of so-called war on terror. But now, U.S. officials publicly, they confess that Taliban are not their enemies. They are true that Taliban, warlords, Al-Qaeda, Osama, and all these other terrorists, they are not their enemies, and they are the enemies of Afghan people, and they have been nourished and created by U.S. government, and still support them for their own interest.
But in every war, there are casualties on both sides. It's just one of the unfortunate products of war, isn't it?
War itself is enough that values like democracy, women's rights, human rights is not never coming by war. And you are mentioning that me as an example. By chance I'm alive. And many women like me, many other activists, democratic-minded like me, that who are alive and still they are underground and facing these challenges, obstacles, risks, dates. And they are trying to build their countries. If U.S. and NATO let them a little bit breathe in peace. And those who come in our country for their own interest, they occupy it. So that's why we believe that they are wasting the blood of their own soldiers, use them as a tool for their criminal war. That's why those troops who are in Afghanistan, they should learn from those brave troops who refuse to go in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other countries that these warmongers are waging wars. They say we don't want to be war criminal. And anyway, what they are doing, for example, these troops who are going in Afghanistan, they are not the son or daughter of Julia Gillard or Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. They have their own parents. And I think this 10 years is enough for Australian justice-loving people, American peace-loving people, and around the world that should know about this disgusting war. And they should put pressure on their government that they stop and end this criminal war as soon as possible, this occupation. And please let Afghan people, again I stress in this comment, that they are the ones that should decide about their own future. But no question that we need a helping hand of justice-loving people around the world. My message is this, that when we want the withdrawal of the troops, but we are asking for the international solidarity of justice-loving, peace-loving people around the world. Millions who agree with us, and they are against war, against occupation. They strongly believe in justice and peace. They must educationally support my people, that as education is a key against occupation and towards emancipation.
Malalai Joya, thank you so much for coming in. We'll have to leave it there.
Thank you. Thanks for the interview.